My name is Marcelo Cruz. I'm a professor at New York University. I'm the editor-in-chief of the Journal of Operational Risk, and I'm an editor of a number of publications as well. I have published 4 books in the past. One of these books is a best-selling risk, more than 20,000 books sold, called Modeling, Measuring, and Hedging Operational Risk. And I'm glad to be here in Mexico. I think it's an idea that makes sense. It's not about the regulation expiring by itself, but because the environment changes a lot. So I give an example to you. Glass-Steagall was created during the Depression in '29, so separate, because one idea at the time, you see, almost 100 years ago, people said the problem is that banks don't take risk correctly. So we need to definitely separate commercial banks from investment banks. So if a bank was an investment bank, it needs to be an investment bank only, and commercial banks need to be commercial banks only. We're almost 100 years later discussing the same thing. Glass-Steagall actually died in the 90s because it didn't make sense. So Citibank could not operate in other states because banks need to be regional. You cannot be operating the whole country, right? So that changes during the 90s, during the Clinton administration. So I think it needs to be revisited. I think they need to have some degree of 10 years, I don't know, some cycle, that people revisit regulations and say, okay, should it continue like this or that, or should it go back to the way it was before, right? So, and that makes sense. And I feel a lot of economists, a lot of legislators also think that we are creating regulations that are good for now, but when things get better, a lot of these things are not going to make sense at all, right? Banks not taking proprietary positions, etc. That doesn't make sense in 5 years maybe. So they need to be revisited. So it's good for a period, but not good for 20 years or 50 years from now. I see, I mean, it's very difficult to make legislations. One thing that I mentioned is the Dodd-Frank, Volcker rule. It's 10,000 pages or more. It's piles of rooms in the Congress full of paperwork to read, like the healthcare, the Obamacare they call in the US as well. Rooms and rooms of paper, 29,000 pages. So it's not feasible. So creating all these rules are very difficult, right? And sometimes they don't make a lot of sense. But some of these things that needs to be embedded in their own firms. I mean, own firms, they have their own culture to deal with, to do what makes sense for them, not take too much risk. And the regulation needs to be simple enough that can be complied upon. If a regulation becomes too complex, too convex, it's also hard to implement for the regulators. So do I understand this correctly? Can I check so many things? I mean, it becomes a burden also for those who are creating the rule, right? Which is clear the case of Dodd-Frank and Volcker rule. So it needs to be simple, needs to be smart, it needs to be simple enough that people can also implement that without the many costs and without compromising survival of these companies.